Let's bring in our roundtable now. Washington Post White House reporter Yasmin Abutaleb, ABC News senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce, Jane Coaston, host of the New York Times The Argument podcast, and ABC News senior national correspondent Terry Moran. Good morning to all of you. And Terry, I'm going to go straight to you. And let's start with the Daily Beast reporting. And there's been reporting since then. Definitely an October surprise for Herschel Walker's campaign. What kind of impact do you think this will have?
Not as great an impact, obviously, as it would have had 10 years ago. There is a sense now that as long as the guy is on your team, that the most important issue in American politics isn't what you believe in, it's who do you hate. And while Walker's not a hater, parties are now that antagonistic that it's clear millions of Republican voters will overlook something that would have destroyed a candidacy just a few years ago. The problem for Walker is, what else is he running on except that he was a football player and a Christian? And while his football record can't be questioned at all, I think this does damage him, and he doesn't really have a lot of other things to say.
Jane Coaston, do you agree with that? And look specifically, if you will, at independent voters. This is a man who says he is staunchly anti-abortion. He's got a conservative son who's also speaking out against it.
Well, I think that the choice will not be that independent and Republican-leaning voters will then vote for Raphael Warnock. I think that some of them might just stay home. I look back at the special election in Alabama involving Roy Moore, where you saw a host of Republicans saying, like, I just can't do this. They leave that name off their ticket or they just stay home. And so I think that this could depress some votes. I don't know if it's going to activate a ton of Democratic voters or get a bunch of people to switch to Raphael Warnock. I do think it's going to cause a bunch of people to say, hey, this is a person who said that they opposed abortion in almost every circumstance, but when it came to it, he demanded, allegedly, a woman have an abortion twice, a woman who already had a child with him who he has allegedly basically ignored his entire life. And, you know, I keep saying that if this is a conversation about abortion on demand, well, Herschel Walker demanded the woman have an abortion twice. And I think that for a lot of voters, particularly pro-life voters, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I think that they might decide, okay, I'm going to vote for Brian Kemp, and then I'm going to not vote in this particular race.
And Mary, you have seen, as Terry alluded to, national Republicans quickly come to Herschel Walker's defense. You've got Rick Scott going down there from Florida. You've got Tom Cotton from Arkansas going down there as well. Do they believe him, or is it just those midterms creeping up?
Yeah, I think this has a lot less to do with Herschel Walker and everything to do with Georgia. I think if this were a different state, this would probably very likely be playing out differently. But because you do have the midterms hanging in the balance, control of the Senate very much should come down to this state. And that is why you are seeing, once again, Republicans at all levels, coalescing around him. You mentioned you have Rick Scott, the head of the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, going down on Tuesday to lend his support. And we have seen this time and time again, where Republicans are willing to look past allegations because the prize is just so big. They're willing to say that their national policy priorities, their ambitions outweigh any concerns about personal behavior, but it is a risky gamble. It always is, and I think it's one of those reasons you heard Mitch McConnell, the top Republican in the Senate, say just a few weeks ago that he has questions about and concerns about the quality of their candidates.
Exactly what I was going to come to you on, Yasmin. So pick it up from there. There are issues with other senatorial candidates in particular, but people are just coalescing around them.
I think that's right. It's also too late to replace Herschel Walker on the ballot with someone else, so I think Republicans feel like they don't have a choice but to stick with him. The Senate is 50-50 right now. And so if they want any hope of controlling the Senate, they can't just cut loose on this race. But like Mary said, Mitch McConnell said he is concerned about the quality of candidates, particularly in the Senate, I think because these races are statewide. And he even said the quality just matters more than in the House. And of course, it's a tighter margin. But you've seen, Oz in Pennsylvania, Blake Masters in Arizona. You've seen a number of these candidates who just, Republicans feel like they could run away with these states. And instead, these states are really going to come down to the wire.
And Terry, 30 days to the midterms, less than a month ago. The Democrats were feeling pretty hopeful about their chances. Do you still get that sense?
Nope. I think the air went out of that balloon, in part because, look, the economy is so tough for so many people. Food prices, rent, spiking. If they've got retirement funds, those are evaporating. And even the issue of abortion, which did drive several special elections and that remarkable referendum result in Kansas. While there are millions of people for whom that will be the #1 issue, I just think the economic headwinds are so tough And Biden he just doesn't have the oomph as a candidate anymore. People don't really want him around, and he can't really make his case. I don't think the Democrats are in any better place. And I would also say, in this country and in other countries, polls are broken, right? It is clear that lots of people on the right just don't answer anymore. They were worse in 2020 than they were in 2016. And so you look at those polls, it's close. If it's close, it's a Republican win.
And Jane, pick up on that too, and the economy. And we've got the OPEC cutting oil. We've got OPEC cutting oil production, which could lead to higher gas prices.
Right, and I think that for a lot of people, that is going to, have a big impact on how they decide to vote. But what I keep thinking is, what are they voting for then? I know that it's a midterm election, and in general, midterm elections are we don't like this guy elections. But with the Republican Party, what are they offering in comparison? What's their fix on inflation? Their fix on inflation is let's scream some more about books in schools. And so I think that for a lot of American voters, you can see why there's increased interest in Libertarian Party candidates and in third-party candidates, because you just see these two sides who offer very few actual solutions. And you have Republicans seemingly rooting for a recession. And then you see a lot of...
So what does it boil down to?
I think it boils down to this is a tough time for a lot of people, and politics isn't offering a lot of answers. And I think that for a lot of people, they're seeing...
Not exactly getting them to the polls.
No, it's not getting to the polls. And I think that that's something you're going to see in the midterms, is that we see in December and after these midterms that, voting was not as high as people expected it to be, I think it would be because people look at a lot of the people running and say, what can you do for me? I don't know.
And Mary, you've been out in the country, but you were also to talk to voters, but you were also on that trip with Joe Biden to Saudi Arabia. So let's go back to OPEC for a minute. That was a huge disappointment for the White House. I know they're saying it wasn't about oil. If it wasn't about oil at all, they missed out on something.
It was about oil. And the president took a huge risk in going on that trip, but they thought it was worth it to try and bring down oil prices. And now the Saudis are really, thumbing their nose at the president on this. Biden says he has options here. He's deciding what to pursue, but the options aren't great, right? I mean, he can try and take some kind of action to limit OPEC's control over the energy market. There's some legislative options. We've seen him not rule out the possibility of rolling back some sanctions on Venezuela, but none of that is immediate. You have the midterms 30 days away. This is a huge risk for Democrats. So I think the big question now is just how do they play this? How do they message this? Are you going to hear them getting out there and touting more steps that the administration has taken to try and lessen dependency on oil, tout the other areas of the economy that are growing? But it's a real challenge for them. Will they, to Jane's point, note, that Republicans have a lack of alternatives? I think you'll hear them do that, but how much are they going to lean into that? Because this is, as you noted, the October surprise they were not hoping to have.
And Yasmin, you've seen some influential Democrats, you've seen Chris Murphy, Dick Durbin call for the U.S. to end its alliance with the Saudis. Is that going to happen?
I don't think so, because these were the same Democrats who, when President Biden was getting ready to go to Saudi Arabia, put out statements saying the U.S. needed to overhaul or just end its relationship with Saudi Arabia. It was mostly Democrats who were very critical of Biden's meeting with MBS. But, this has always been a sticking point for the U.S., that especially for President Biden, who says he wants to put human rights at the center of his foreign policy agenda. I think there are just certain political realities that every U.S. president has contended with Saudi Arabia. I think most, if given the choice, would not want to have the relationship because it is so problematic. But no one has actually been able to cut off that relationship because of the oil relationship, because of the security relationship, and the need for a partner like that in the Middle East, even with all of the problems and headaches that relationship comes with.
And Terry, there was some little side good news, I suppose, or a distraction for the Biden administration with the marijuana laws or the marijuana imprisonment. Those guys can...
It's a gesture, but it's one that would be popular with essentially the Democratic base. It doesn't affect a lot of people, but it crystallizes in our oldest president the desires of the youngest Americans, which is that it doesn't make sense anymore to younger Americans and lots of Americans. I mean, let's face it, weed is now kind of a national pastime in lots and lots of places. And this is, as I say, only a few thousand people will be affected. But it also gets at a deeper problem, that the drug laws, were vicious in some ways. These are people who had no violence. No, they weren't dealing. They weren't doing anything. They were holding a drug that is widely popular, has been for 50 years. And the president, sending a message, I'm on your side, hopes that that'll resonate a little bit.
Jane, I want to go back to what Republicans in particular are campaigning on. They're kind of going dark here, talking about crime, but there was quite the soundbite last night from Tommy Tuberville. Let's listen to this.
The Democratic Party, they have a majority. They could stop this crime today. They're not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bull. They are not owed that.
Whoa.
Wow. He has not improved since
That was
he
at a Trump rally.
Yes, I was very much at a Trump rally. He really hasn't improved since he was coach at Cincinnati, has he? But I think that what you're seeing from this, one, is it's a Trump rally. He's talking to a very specific audience. But I think also it's this idea, specifically with regard to marijuana, that the people who use marijuana are are black men. When actually marijuana use is incredibly popular across a wide spectrum, including older people. If you go down to the villages in Florida, you see a lot of Trump voters who are eating a lot of edibles. And so I think that changing the scheduling I think that's the more important part of Biden's effort, is to look at changing the scheduling of marijuana, which is currently listed as being the same as LSD or heroin, which, I think we're all pretty clear it isn't. But I think that this is an effort to go back to kind of that 1980s tough on crime attitude, particularly coming from a political party that isn't offering much of an alternative. When Joe Biden talks about how we need to fund the police, Republicans are responding with, no. Yes? And so I think that I don't know. I was going to say that it was kind of like a retro take on a tough on crime attitude, but if you're just screaming about how black people want reparations because they're the people who commit crimes, that's a throwback we don't need.
And Yasmin, I also want to talk about immigration. You had Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly criticizing the president's handling of immigration. We have about 40 seconds here. Where does this go? Is there really a strategy?
Well, I think Mark Kelly has actually been critical of Biden's immigration strategy for some time now. It's not actually new to the election. He was critical last year, sort of preparing for these attacks. I don't know that it goes anywhere because Democrats, this has always been an issue for them. And they know if the race is about immigration, they're losing. So I think it's a challenge. I think Mark Kelly is trying to distance himself from Biden here. But immigration is just generally not a winning issue for Democrats.
And we've got a long way to go on that. Thanks to all of you for joining us this morning.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.